It was an accident so stupid. It was like running with a pencil. It was not a risk he was taking. It was not a superhuman feat of anything. It was just an accident.
Terry Irwin has always been a pillar of courage and determination, dedicating her life to protecting wildlife and preserving the mission she built alongside her late husband, Steve Irwin. But even she couldn't hold back her emotions when faced with a moment that struck deeper than words could express. It wasn't grief that moved her to tears. It was something far more profound. Her son, Robert Irwin, has made a strange transformation, embracing a path so remarkable, so unexpected, that it has left Terry severely overwhelmed. In today's video, we uncover the remarkable journey of Robert Irwin, his evolution from a wide-eyed boy growing up in the shadow of his legendary father, Steve Irwin, to a global force for wildlife conservation in his own right. We'll explore Terry's unwavering strength as a mother, her dedication to preserving Steve's mission, and the deeply personal moments that have shaped their family's future. Stay with us as we dive into a story of love, loss, and a legacy that refuses to fade. Steve Irwin was more than just a television personality. He was a force of nature. His passion for wildlife was electric, drawing in millions who couldn't help but be inspired by his fearless love for the animal kingdom. Whether he was wrestling crocodiles or speaking to children about conservation, he had a rare ability to make people care, to make them feel like they were part of something bigger than themselves. He wasn't just an entertainer. He was a man on a mission, dedicating his life to protecting endangered species and educating the world about the importance of preserving nature. But in 2006, that mission came to a devastating halt. A freak accident involving a stingray took Steve's life, leaving an entire world in shock. The man who seemed invincible, who had stared down some of the most dangerous creatures on the planet with a fearless grin, was gone in an instant. Fans grieved. Fellow conservationists mourned. But no one felt the loss more deeply than Terry Irwin, his wife, his partner, and the mother of his two young children. The man she had built a life with, the father who had adored his family with every ounce of his being, was suddenly ripped away, leaving a void that could never be filled. For Terry, there was no time to collapse under the weight of grief. She had two children, Bindi, just 8 years old, and Robert, barely 2, who had lost their father. She had a conservation empire that Steve had built with his own hands, one that the world was watching. The responsibility was crushing, the expectations overwhelming. But she knew there was only one path forward. She had to keep going. Not just for herself, but for Steve, for the children they had raised together, and most importantly, for the mission that had defined their lives. In the years that followed, Terry faced challenges that would have broken most people. Running the Australia Zoo without Steve was like trying to navigate without a compass. Every exhibit, every enclosure, every animal was a reminder of the man who had made it all possible. But instead of pulling away, she leaned in. She expanded the zoo's conservation programs, growing it into one of the most respected wildlife institutions in the world. She spearheaded efforts to rescue and rehabilitate thousands of injured animals, ensuring that Steve's dream didn't just survive, it thrived. At the same time, she had to raise her children in the public eye, under the constant scrutiny of a world that still saw them as an extension of Steve Irwin's legacy. Bindi, wise beyond her years, stepped into the spotlight early, carrying her father's message with grace and enthusiasm. But for Robert, the journey was different. He was too young to remember Steve in the way the rest of the world did. His memories were formed through stories, through old video footage, through the words of his mother and sister. He wasn't just growing up in the shadow of a legend, he was discovering who he was within it. Terry made sure that, no matter what, her children would never forget the values Steve had lived by. She encouraged their love for wildlife, nurtured their curiosity, and instilled in them the same passion that had once driven their father. She didn't just tell them about Steve, she made sure they felt him in everything they did. Whether it was feeding a crocodile, rescuing an injured koala, or speaking to a crowd about conservation, Steve's presence was always there, guiding them forward. For years, Terry carried the weight of that responsibility. She made sure that the Australia Zoo remained a beacon of hope for endangered animals. She ensured that the world didn't forget Steve's message, that his work continued even in his absence. And through it all, she watched as Bindi and Robert grew into the next generation of conservationists, ready to carry the torch their father had left behind. But while Bindi embraced the spotlight early on, Robert's journey was quieter, more personal. He wasn't just following in his father's footsteps, he was slowly carving his own path. And as Terry watched her son transform, stepping into a role she had always hoped he would embrace, she couldn't help but be overwhelmed by emotion. It was a bittersweet moment, one filled with pride, with love, and with the deep, unshakable feeling that Steve was still with them, watching over the family he had left behind. Robert Irwin's childhood was anything but ordinary. While most kids grew up playing in backyards with swings and sandboxes, Robert's playground was the Australia Zoo. His backyard was filled with crocodiles, kangaroos, and exotic birds. From the moment he could walk, he was surrounded by wildlife, not just as a spectator, but as someone truly immersed in the animal kingdom. This wasn't just a zoo to him, it was home. And for a boy raised in an environment like that, falling in love with nature wasn't a choice. It was inevitable. Robert's father, Steve Irwin, made sure his son had a hands-on education like no other. Before he could even form full sentences, Robert was learning how to handle animals with care and respect. His father taught him how to observe wildlife, to understand their behaviors, and most importantly, to appreciate them as living, breathing creatures deserving of protection. While other kids watched cartoons, Robert was out in the field with his father, watching as Steve fearlessly handled reptiles, tended to injured animals, and spoke about conservation with an energy that was impossible to ignore. But in 2006, that world changed forever. Steve's passing left an empty space in Robert's life, one that no one could ever truly fill. He was just 2 years old when his father was taken from him. Too young to fully understand the loss, but old enough to feel it in ways he couldn't put into words. While the world grieved the crocodile hunter, Robert had to grow up learning about his father through stories, through old footage, through the memories shared by those who had known and loved Steve best. He would never have the chance to walk hand in hand with his father, but he would always carry his spirit with him. Even as a toddler, it was clear that Robert had inherited Steve's boundless energy and fascination with the natural world. While most children his age were learning basic motor skills, Robert was handling lizards, studying insects, and watching his mother and sister continue the conservation work that Steve had started. By the time he was 4 years old, he was already appearing on television alongside Terry and Bindi, charming audiences with his infectious excitement for wildlife. There was something undeniably familiar about him. His enthusiasm, his curiosity, the way he spoke about animals as if they were old friends. He was his father's son, through and through. But Robert's journey wasn't about stepping into Steve's shoes. It was about forging his own path. From a young age, he showed a deep interest in photography, capturing wildlife through a lens with an artistry and precision that set him apart. He had his father's passion, but he was expressing it in a way that was uniquely his own. And while the world couldn't help but see Steve in him, Robert was determined to be recognized not just as the crocodile hunter's son, but as a conservationist in his own right. For Terry, watching Robert grow was both beautiful and heartbreaking. There were moments where she would catch a glimpse of him, a certain expression, a mannerism, a way he interacted with animals, and it was as if Steve was standing right there. It was a bittersweet reminder of the man she had loved, the father Robert had lost too soon. She often spoke about the ache of raising her children without Steve by her side, about the weight of knowing he would never see the incredible young man Robert was becoming. And yet, she also found comfort in those little moments where Steve's presence shone through. It was proof that his legacy wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in the next generation. Robert's childhood was shaped by more than just his father's legacy. He had a mother who poured everything into ensuring he grew up knowing who his father was, not just as the world saw him, but as the man who had adored his family with all his heart. He had a sister who took on a protective role, guiding him through the complexities of growing up in the spotlight. And he had his own unstoppable passion for wildlife, a force that pushed him forward, that made him eager to learn, to explore, and to carry on the work his father had started. Even as a child, Robert understood that his father's mission was bigger than any one person. It wasn't just about Steve, it was about the animals, the environment, and the generations that would come after him. And though he had been so young when Steve passed, Robert took it upon himself to ensure that his father's dream never faded. He wasn't just following in Steve's footsteps, he was walking his own path, side by side with the memory of the father who had inspired him from the very beginning. Robert Irwin was never just another kid growing up in the public eye. He was born into a legacy that the world adored. From an early age, cameras followed his every move, but not because he was seeking fame. He was a child raised in the heart of a conservation empire, one built by a man who had made the world fall in love with wildlife. As he grew, it became clear that Robert had inherited more than just his father's love for animals. He had the same natural charisma, the same ability to captivate an audience, and a passion that burned just as brightly. His first steps into the spotlight weren't forced. They were natural. He made early television appearances alongside his mother and sister, introducing audiences to the animals that had always been part of his life. Even as a young boy, there was something magnetic about him. His excitement was infectious, his knowledge impressive, and his ability to connect with people undeniable. He had a way of making wildlife education thrilling, just like his father had before him. But as Robert grew older, the world began to realize something. He wasn't just a copy of Steve Irwin. He was his own person, with his own voice and his own way of carrying on the mission. One of the defining moments in Robert's rise came when he appeared on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. He was just a teenager, but his presence on stage was nothing short of extraordinary. As he handled exotic animals with ease, cracking jokes and educating the audience, viewers couldn't help but see glimpses of Steve in him. The way he spoke, the way he lit up when talking about conservation, it was all so familiar. But at the same time, Robert had his own charm, his own way of making people care. It wasn't an imitation, it was a continuation, a fresh take on the same unshakable passion that had defined his father's life. That moment sent waves across social media. Clips of Robert's appearance went viral, with fans commenting on how much he reminded them of Steve. But more importantly, it solidified him as a public figure in his own right. He wasn't just Steve Irwin's son anymore. He was Robert Irwin, a young conservationist making his mark on the world. And that was something his mother, Terry, had always hoped for. She wanted Robert to honor his father's legacy, but not be overshadowed by it. She wanted him to find his own way, to bring his own energy to the mission they had all dedicated their lives to. And that's exactly what Robert did. As he continued making media appearances, speaking at events, and working at the Australia Zoo, he developed his own unique storytelling style. He wasn't just repeating Steve's words. He was sharing his own experiences, his own discoveries, and his own passion for conservation. He used humor, excitement, and knowledge to engage people, proving that he had all the makings of a modern conservation leader. His love for photography became a key part of his journey, allowing him to share breathtaking images of wildlife with the world and raise awareness in a way that was distinctly his own. Terry watched all of this unfold with a heart full of pride and emotion. Every time she saw Robert speak about animals, every time she watched him fearlessly handle crocodiles, it was as if she was seeing Steve all over again. But it wasn't just nostalgia that moved her. It was the realization that Robert had grown into something even greater than she had imagined. He wasn't living in Steve's shadow. He was standing in the light of his own accomplishments, carrying the torch in a way that was both familiar and entirely new. For Terry, seeing Robert work with crocodiles was one of the most emotional experiences of all. It was something he had grown up around, something that had been second nature to Steve, and now it was second nature to Robert, too. She had watched him evolve from a little boy in awe of the animals around him to a young man who understood their behaviors, respected their power, and worked to protect them. It was proof that Steve's dream hadn't just survived. It had been reborn in Robert, stronger than ever. She often spoke about how she could feel Steve's presence in those moments. It wasn't just the way Robert moved or spoke. It was the look in his eyes, the undeniable passion that drove him forward. And while it brought bittersweet emotions, it also brought comfort. Because in Robert, Steve's mission would never die. It would continue to grow, evolve, and reach new generations. And for Terry, there was no greater pride than knowing that the love Steve had poured into his family and his work was still changing the world through the son he had left behind. For Robert Irwin, conservation has never been just about working with animals. It's about telling their stories. While he grew up handling crocodiles and learning the ins and outs of wildlife care, he discovered another way to connect people with nature, through the lens of a camera. Photography became more than just a hobby for him. It became a way to capture the beauty, the struggle, and the urgency of conservation in a way that words never could. Unlike his father, who brought wildlife into homes through television, Robert found his voice through still images. His photographs weren't just pictures. They were windows into a world that many people would never see firsthand. Every shot he took carried a message, a reminder of the delicate balance of nature, the threats that endangered species faced, and the raw, untamed beauty of the animal kingdom. His camera became his tool for advocacy, allowing him to share the wonder of wildlife with people around the world and inspire them to take action. One of Robert's most powerful moments as a photographer came when he captured the devastation of the Australian wildfires. The image, an eerie, smoke-filled landscape with charred trees standing like skeletons against the ash-covered ground, was haunting. It told the story of destruction, of loss, and of a natural world struggling to recover. The photo quickly went viral, drawing attention to the crisis in a way that statistics and reports never could. It was a defining moment in Robert's journey, proving that his work had the power to move people, to make them care, and to spark change. For Terry, seeing Robert's success as a photographer brought a flood of emotions. She had always known he had a deep connection to wildlife, but watching him use his talent to advocate for conservation on a global scale filled her with overwhelming pride. His images weren't just capturing nature. They were preserving the mission that Steve had dedicated his life to. And in those quiet moments, as she looked at Robert's photographs, she felt something deeper, a sense that Steve was still with them, watching through the lens of his son's camera, smiling at the legacy that lived on. For Terry Irwin, watching Robert grow has been a journey filled with bittersweet emotions. She's seen him evolve from a wide-eyed child exploring the Australia Zoo to a young man stepping into the role his father once held. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was years of learning, of growing, of finding his own voice in the world of conservation. And through it all, she watched with admiration, knowing that every step he took was leading him toward something extraordinary. There was a time when Robert was simply the little boy who tagged along with his mom and sister, absorbing everything around him. But now, he's the one leading the way. Whether it's handling a massive crocodile with the same confidence his father once had, or speaking passionately about protecting endangered species, Robert has stepped fully into his calling. He's no longer following in Steve's footsteps. He's carving out his own path while keeping the mission alive. And for Terry, that realization was one of the most emotional moments of her life. There was one particular moment that brought Terry to tears, a moment where she saw, without a doubt, that Robert had fully embraced his role. It wasn't just about seeing him handle an animal or give a speech. It was something deeper. It was the way he carried himself, the way he spoke with conviction, the way he looked at the world with the same passion Steve once had. It was as if, for a brief moment, Steve was standing there again. But at the same time, it wasn't Steve. It was Robert, becoming the person he was always meant to be. She once said, "It's like Steve is still here, but Robert is making his own path." That thought is what brings her comfort. It's not about replacing what was lost. It's about continuing what was started. Terry doesn't see this as a sad moment, but as a celebration. A celebration of everything Steve believed in, everything Robert has become, and everything their family continues to fight for. The strength of the Irwin family has never come from one person alone. It comes from love, from unity, from the unwavering belief that they are part of something greater than themselves. And in that, Steve's legacy isn't just surviving, it's thriving. The Irwin legacy was never meant to be carried by just one person. It was built on family, on unity, on a shared purpose that extended beyond a single generation. Robert and Bindi have become a force together, working side by side to continue the mission their father started. Whether it's through their work at the Australia Zoo, their television programs, or their conservation efforts across the globe, they are not just preserving Steve's dream. They are expanding it, ensuring that his message reaches more people than ever before. In today's world, conservation isn't just about being in the field, it's about reaching people where they are. And that's exactly what Robert and Bindi are doing. Through social media, they've found a way to connect with millions, using their platforms to educate, inspire, and call others to action. Every post, every photo, every video they share is a reminder that wildlife needs protecting, that every person can make a difference, and that the natural world is worth fighting for. They're not just following in their father's footsteps, they're bringing his mission into a new era, making it accessible to a generation that never had the chance to see Steve in action. Terry has always believed that the true measure of a legacy isn't in how long people remember a name, but in how deeply they embrace the message behind it. She has often said, "Steve wanted to make sure people remembered the message, not just the man." And that's exactly what's happening. The Irwin family isn't just honoring Steve's memory, they're ensuring that his passion, his dedication, and his fight for wildlife conservation continue to live on. Through their work, they are passing that mission down to new generations, proving that one person, one family, can truly make a difference. And as long as they continue, the legacy of Steve Irwin will never fade. It will only grow stronger. Robert Irwin's journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. From a little boy growing up in the heart of the Australia Zoo to a world-renowned conservationist, he has embraced his father's mission while forging his own path. What started as a child mimicking his dad's every move has turned into a lifelong commitment to wildlife, education, and environmental protection. He is no longer just Steve Irwin's son. He is a leader in his own right, inspiring millions to care about the natural world. Terry Irwin has never seen this as a story of loss. To her, it has always been about hope. Hope that the mission Steve started will never fade. Hope that future generations will carry on the fight for conservation, and hope that through Robert and Bindi, their family's impact on the world will only grow stronger. She has watched her son transform into a passionate advocate, and while the journey has been emotional, it has also been incredibly rewarding. Steve may be gone, but his spirit lives on in the work they do every single day. Now, we want to hear from you. What do you think of Robert Irwin's transformation? Has his journey inspired you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories of conservation, resilience, and the people making a difference in the world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.